There was no North or South Korea. Like Hosong 14, Hosong 15. More bombs were dropped on the North than Japan. Japan took over Korea completely. Isolated, how did they become the one country America won't directly controls what people watch and how they look? He had his own uncle killed. Let's get started. North Korea is considered one of the world's poorest and most isolated nations, with the national income per capita estimated often around range of $1,000 to $1,300. So its economy is tiny compared to United States, and most of its people don't have access to even internet, and its cities go dark at night. And yet every American president handles it carefully. If they are so poor and isolated, how did they become the one country America won't directly? By the end of this video, you will understand something uncomfortable. Removing North Korea might actually be more dangerous than leaving it alone. Because the problem isn't just the regime. If it suddenly collapsed, you could have millions of people fleeing to the borders, rival generals fighting for control, and nuclear sites that no one controls. China moving in from the north, the US and the South Korea from the south, all of them scared of making one wrong move. That's the part almost nobody explains. And to see how this poor isolated country became that dangerous to touch, we have to go back to where the story started. Over 500 years, Korea was one unified civilization under the Joseon dynasty. One language, one culture, one identity. There was no North or South Korea, just Korea. It was culturally influenced by China, but politically independent. The United States had nothing to do with Korea at this time. Korea limited foreign access. It was sometimes called Hermit's Kingdom, not because of communism, but it was surrounded by large powers and isolation was survival. Then Japan changed everything. In 1905, Japan defeated Russia. In 1910, Japan took over Korea completely. Korean language was suppressed. People were forced to adopt Japanese names. Resources were extracted. Hundreds of thousands were forced into labor. Women were forced into a military sexual slavery. But here's a detail that matters later. Japan built heavy industries mostly in North Korea, factories, dams, railways. So, when Korea was liberated, the North was actually more industrialized than the South. Then, the World War II ended and the real fracture began.
And win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace that will follow.
Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. This made United States enter the war. In 1945, Japan was almost about to lose, but it refused to surrender. The US believed a land invasion would cause enormous casualties.
This is war.
Atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Japan had to surrender. And suddenly, Korea was free. But the Soviet Union had entered the war and moved into North Korea. The US didn't want the entire peninsula under the Soviet control. So, Americans officially drew a line at the 28th parallel. No Korean leaders were a part of that decision. It was meant to be temporary, but it became permanent. By 1948, two governments were formed. In North, Kim Il-sung was backed by the Soviet Union. In South, Simon Rhee, backed by the United States. Both claimed to represent Korea. In June 1950, North Korea invaded Seoul, the capital of South Korea.
War and its men. War.
But the United States intervened under the United Nations. US forces pushed north almost to China's border. But then China entered with hundreds of thousands of troops. The war became brutal. And here's something Americans rarely hear. The US bombing in the north was devastating. More bombs were dropped on the north than Japan during the war. Entire cities flat, dams were destroyed, and the infrastructure completely erased. Chinese generation grew up with that war as the proof that America tried to erase. The war did end in 1953, but it was a formal agreement to stop the active fighting without resolving the underlying conflict. So technically, they are still at war today. Let's see how Kim solidified his system. Do you know how exactly Kim solidified the system? Let's take a look at it. After the war, Kim Il-sung consolidated the power. North Korea became one party state. The ideology was Gucci, self reliance. In practice, a centralized control.
At 10 o'clock in the morning, Kim Jong-il, General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea, Chairman of the National Defense Commission of the Democratic People.
Here came the twist. In 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed. North Korea lost the economic support. Femini killed hundreds of thousands. And this is where the nuclear logic locks in. North Korea was closely watching the world. Iran was invaded. Libya gave up its nuclear ambitions, and their regime also collapsed. Every regime that gave up its nuclear ambition ended up badly. North Korea treated that as a lesson and not a warning. But their story started even earlier. In 1980s and early 1990s, they built their main nuclear site at Yongbyon and quietly produced plutonium, the material you need for early bombs. By the mid 1990s, US analysts believed the North Korea already has enough plutonium for one or two nuclear devices. So in 1994, the US actually considered bombing those nuclear facilities. On paper, it looked simple: hit Yongbyon, stop the program. But then the generals ran the numbers. North Korea already had thousands of artillery pieces pointing at South Korea. Seoul, a city of millions, is only about 35 kilometers from the border. If the war started, those guns could hit Seoul within minutes and kill 10,000s of civilians in just few hours. The cost of attacking was too high. So instead of a war, Washington chose a deal to freeze the plutonium program. The nuclear treaty was delayed, not erased. Over the next decades, the US intelligence kept saying North Korea was still years far away from a serious long range missile. But every time the estimate skipped, North Korea tested more, dug deeper underground, hid more, and moved faster than expected. By 2017, it tested intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, like Hwasong 14, Hwasong 15, and later Hwasong 17.
Korea. Longest range missile at present is Hwasong 15. Operational range 13,000 kilometers. The Hwasong 15 is an intercontinental ballistic missile developed by North Korea.
Are those missiles perfect? We don't know. Their exact reliability is debatable. But for deterrence, they don't need to be perfect. They just need to believe enough that any US president has to think, what if one of this gets through? So let's see how North Korea is currently today. North Korea is poor compared to other countries. Its economy is small. People have limited access to the goods. And everyday life is hard for many. Power cuts and blackouts are routine because the electric system itself is outdated and unfunded. Electricity cuts and blackouts are common because the power grid is old, unfunded, and damaged. Sanctions and isolations means trade with the outside world is tightly restricted. So there isn't much money or technology coming in. But the government still pours a big share of its limited resource into the military and weapon programs, following its slogan, military first, even while the rest of the economy struggles. They also heavily invest in cyber operations. Kim's North Korea tightly controls what people watch and how they look. Foreign films, K dramas, and Western music are illegal, and being caught with them can lead to prison or even harsher punishment. There are reports of the state approved hairstyles and bans or crackdowns on blue jeans, tight jeans, dyed hair. In 2013, Kim Jong un did something that shocked even people inside his own system. He had his own uncle, Jang Song Cheok, one of the most powerful men in North Korea, publicly removed and then killed. The signal to everyone around him was simple. If he can eliminate family, he can eliminate anyone. In that system, no one is truly safe. Did you know that China's interest in North Korea is strategic, not emotional? If the regime in Pyongyang suddenly collapsed and Korea gets reunified under the pro US government, American troops could one day sit right next to China's border. So, Beijing doesn't support North Korea out of friendship. It supports a buffer that keeps the US force at a distance. Russia's role is smaller than it was during the Soviet times, but its logic is similar. Moscow also prefers a hostile but predictable North Korea over a unified US aligned Korea on its peripheral. In the end, North Korea survives not just by its own choice, but because the rivals' great powers keep each other in check, and that balance makes the status quo safer for them than the sudden change. In 2018, Kim Jong un met the US President Donald Trump. For North Korea, that was a breakthrough. For the first time in the history, a sitting American president walked out, shook Kim's hand, and stood beside him as if they were equals on the world stage. Kim didn't give up his nuclear weapons, but he walked away with something he would want for years: the images of the United States treating him like a recognized, legitimate leader, a perfect material for North Korea's state media, and a powerful signal to the rest of the world. Sometimes in geopolitics, the photo is the real deal. The handshake can matter almost as much as a document. Recently, Kim Jong un has started appearing in front of the public with his young daughter Kim Joo Ye. State media shows her standing beside missiles, generals, and even on foreign trips. Not in the background, but next to him. In a system built on the scared family bloodline, that's not random. It's a signal the Kim dynasty is meant to continue. And the next generation is being linked directly to the nuclear weapon and power. For North Koreans, she isn't just a child, she is the future of the regime. And that's the uncomfortable answer to your question. North Korea isn't just one man you can remove. It's a whole system built on trauma, dynasty, nukes, geography. A system so risky to break that even superpowers step carefully around it.